mankind, if he were immortal, would be free to, like, you know, see greater and greater heights. That's great on a social, racial level. On an individual level, it can be kind of, I would think, frustrating. Because every individual in the world, somewhere within themselves, has limits as to how good they can get. They have limits as to how far they can go. And if you are a writer, for example, or if you are a painter, and you keep working on your work, I think that sooner or later, you've got to run to the law of diminishing returns. You've got to reach a point where your work is no longer really evolving. You've hit your peak. From then on, it's downhill. I think that if mankind were immortal, the first thing you'd see is an increase in the suicide rates. Because I think people would just absolutely go out of their minds.
Yeah, life's a bitch and then you don't die. In John Varley's latest novel, Steel Beach, the crushing weight of a long, long life drives Hildy Johnson to attempt suicide. The attempt is thwarted by the central computer, which wants to study Hildy in hopes of discovering why so many of the moon's residents are feeling suicidal, including the computer itself. In Marooned in Realtime, Vernor Vinge kept his long-lived characters from feeling bored or depressed by giving them an important task: rebuilding humanity after a nuclear war. Since already had Joan Vinge immortalized on tape, yesterday I called up her ex-husband for his thoughts. Vernor, how did you envision the longevity that you gave your characters in Marooned in Realtime affecting them psychologically?
What is actually seen in the stories of pro-longevity, of people living a long time, is actually very mild. The amount of real time that people have lived in the stories for most of the characters is on the order of a couple hundred years. And my personal opinion is that a length of time that great for most people would just be a lot of fun. It would be everything good that people think of about immortality, and I'm all for it. There are a few characters in the story that have lived in real time for 1,000 to 10,000 years.
Right.
And one of the points of the story is that while it may be possible to live forever, part of the price of living forever is being willing to take on a greater mental size artificially. This could be through genetic engineering or through extending yourself, distributing yourself through added computing ability, but that if you want to live a lot longer than 1,000 years, you're going to have to become something greater than human. And if you want to live 1 billion years, then you're talking about something becoming so much greater than human that in itself raises some questions about mortality.
A while back, I questioned Larry Niven about the hero of Ringworld, Louis Wu. Louis is introduced as human and old, bored with having lived too fully for far too many years, seeking a challenge and all too capable of handling it. And that capability created a problem with Louis that Larry didn't foresee.
Let me point something. I had this pointed out to me. There was a game, the Ringworld game from Chaosium. The Chaosium game, I never played it myself, but I asked people who had. It was a board game, and I was told, if your character is over 200 years old, it takes over an hour to draw up the chart, because he's done everything. He's got every skill.
Well, isn't that Louis' problem too, keeping all his memories straight?
Yeah, that's the problem. I was younger when I was writing the Known Space series.
Right.
At this point, I might well give him plugs in his head and software to mate him with a memory storage unit. He'd have extra memory stored on disk.
Or on a cyber headband. In Spider Robinson's novel Time Pressure, the immortal Rachel wears a headband that stores such useful information as hippie dialect. Hit it, Nancy. You see, Rachel is a groovy time tripper from the funky future who's dropped in on the whole scene that's happening in 70s Nova Scotia. But the downer is this trip's one way, and as our hero Sam Mead discovers, Rachel has totally blown her immortality to do the whole time jump thing. Bummer. Spider, do we really want immortality?
Well, who's we? Do we really want immortality? I don't know about you. I do. My intent is to live forever or die trying. Now, I may ask me again in 500 or 600 years, but I'm looking forward to it. One of the things that's been energizing Jeannie and myself, recently we had the realization that we've read an awful lot of science fiction about folks with immortality or greatly extended lifespans, which from the point of view of someone who's limited to 70 seems like effective immortality. And that in all that literature, we cannot come up with one example of a couple who stayed married. That the inevitable, invariable assumption is if you live to be 1,000 years old, well, of course you'll marry 8 or 9 or 10 times because no marriage could possibly last more than 40 or 50 years before you just can't stand the sight of each other. And it just seems to me that maybe we ought to have one nod to the possibility that maybe love is, or can be, or could be something like forever. And so we're going to sometime in the near future make a conscious attempt to come up with a story involving a couple who's been together for 9 or 10 years and is still going strong. Possibly because we're 18 years in and still going strong, and look around and see so few of our contemporaries with anything like as many combat ribbons on their uniforms.
But what if only one partner is immortal? Imagine the horror of staying youthful while those around you age. That's the horror Dick Clark feels. Immortality has long been a staple of horror fiction, as in, it can't be killed, or it lives again. Clive Barker has dealt with this theme in Cabal and Imagica, and although Clive has strayed from pure horror recently, he's still intrigued by immortality. The Thief of Always is a fable in which 11-year-old Harvey Swick is promised eternal summer by the ever-smiling creature called Rictus. Ah, Clive, it's Commander Rick. Why in your work, especially in The Thief of Always, does immortality come with such a high price?
Everything in my books comes with a great cost. It's not just immortality. I think there are, over and over again in the books and the movies, prices to be paid for everything, including the business of living. And I think that's my experience of the business of living. And I think that's perhaps more acute and more obvious in The Thief of Always than elsewhere, because the fable form is sparser, and it pares down what the moral underpinning of the material is. It's very obvious. I think if you like, the lessons of Thief of Always are maybe more obvious than they've been in previous books.
I guess, but then why do so many of the evil characters in your stories dangle immortality as the great prize?
Because I think it is one of the great prizes. I think we live in terror of death. And if we go back over folklore and mythology and fairy tale, it is one of the great promises, isn't it? You can live forever and be unconditionally loved. Those are the two great prizes offered by the devil.
Right.
And who would not fall for either of those tricks?
So then, is immortality all that it's really cracked up to be?
Ask me in 3,000 years, I'll tell you. I'm not absolutely sure. I don't think anything is what it's cracked up to be. No, that's not strictly true. There's a few things. But I think by and large in my books, people discover that when they're promised things, there's usually some payment.
Thanks, Clive. The strongest connection between love, long life, and horror is in Vampire Tales. And the most celebrated creator of vampire stories today is Anne Rice.